Hey everybody, and welcome back to Video Game Entertaining Series. Who's Nintendo is doing or screwing this week, but we have a special guest appearance by Sega. The story I'm going to be talking about is absolutely wild and insane in all of the weirdest ways, and it is something that I was aware of, but it was just a rumor at the time that I was actually made aware of it, so I wanted to wait for more information to come out, so I didn't make a video with a lot of presumptions. Well, all that information has come home to nest today, and when I say this is just straight up some of the craziest stuff involving police raids and arrests you're going to hear in video gaming, I 100% mean it, because some months ago there was a group buy for a bunch of development kits and prototypes from the Sega of Europe offices. Basically what happened was Sega was relinquishing those offices and they had some sort of group come in and basically liquidate all the inventory, furniture, everything in the office and otherwise, which is a very common thing to do in business. I've seen it happen, but apparently somebody at Sega of Europe slid through that entire sale without removing any of the dev kits or prototypes, and they were sold to a reseller legally as such. And now that reseller was raided by police and a bunch of stuff was taken from their possession. They were fingerprinted, brought in, and interrogated. I absolutely shit you not, this is something that actually happened, and we now have all the receipts to talk about it. And even though I said who's Nintendo suing or screwing this week, it is Sega, but you're going to notice that Nintendo has their fingerprints all over this, so much so they put their hand on a bag of Cheetos and slapped this person across the face, leaving those orange stained fingerprints behind. And like I said, this was a rumor for a few months, and it's something that I was following along with in the background, talking to some people, but I really didn't have any sort of concrete information to say that what this person was stating was in fact true. But now with different PDFs over the warrants and everything else, it is unequivocally something that did happen to someone who honestly traded money, £10,000 in this instance, to buy this inventory that was left in Sega of Europe's offices, and that's just crazy. Now if we take a look here, you'll see all of these different prototype cartridges. We see Sonic All-Stars, we see Phantasy Star, we see some of this Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games, and honestly none of this stuff was actually taken. All of these prototype games in the raid were not removed from the buyer's home whatsoever. It was all down to development kits. I will give you one guess and one guess only. Leave it down in the comments. Who do you think those development kits were made by? It wasn't Sega, obviously, they don't make hardware, and it wasn't Microsoft, and it wasn't Sony either. Of course, it's our old friend Nintendo, and even though Nintendo is not specified in this story, it does not take much reading between the lines, because trust me, those lines are so damn big, you could drive a Mack truck through them and still have room to spare on both sides. And again, it's just Nintendo via Sega this time doing some absolutely wily coyote shit out there. And there is a listing of all the different prototypes here, and the reality is these things change hands all the time. Development kits, prototypes that are out there are bought and sold and dumped and preserved basically ad nauseum. As long as the day is long, someone's going to find something and want to sell it or share it. So the fact is, stuff like this isn't new whatsoever, but this was pretty public because a group of preservationists, the Video Game Preservation Society, was trying to actually get a hold of it, and someone actually masqueraded as a potential buyer that worked for Sega to investigate what this buyer actually had. And the reality is, I have had a ton of different development hardware, dev kits, and otherwise come through my collection, either sent in for videos or stuff that I own throughout the years. So I am no different than anybody else out there. I'm always trying to find things to preserve them, either in video form for the history of the object, or honestly dumping them and sharing lost games, because this is basically the successor system right here to the Hyper Neo Geo 64 when SNK was playing the SNK Millennium console. These things get out of offices all day long and twice on Sundays, and no one is going to be raiding my house to take any of it. Trust me, I live in Chicago. Even if I was actively being murdered, I don't think the police would show up if I called. Or something like this, the Atari Otis soundboard from an Atari Panther development kit, a console that never actually existed because the Jaguar basically superseded its development. These are just some of the things that I've either had come through or have actively sitting on my shelf right now, but someone in Britain just ended up having a bulk buy from an office sale, and they ended up getting arrested and having their house raided by the British police. Imagine Sonic the Hedgehog just kicking your door down like the damn Kool-Aid man, trying to take you out of your house in handcuffs to interrogate you because you legally bought something that was for sale, and now suddenly that legal purchase ends up with you in legal hot water. That's batshit crazy insane. And I can't stress enough of all the stories I've talked about in 2025 involving Nintendo or other lawsuits or other raids. This one just absolutely reeks of a corporation making a mistake and selling something they didn't want to sell, and then deciding to use the legal and court system along with the police in a country to do their bidding to try to recover that hardware. Because again, the seller just bought this for £10,000. Now let me tell you how to solve this very simply if you're Sega. You call the guy up and you say, we fucked up, here's £20,000, sell it back to us, let's make a deal. Everyone gets paid. £10,000 for Sega is a drop in the bucket, a rounding error in fact, and this doesn't end up in the news. But now the amount of bad press Sega is going to purchase by doing this via the police is just absolutely staggering. You don't want to buy bad press. I've dealt with this in businesses before. I've worked in sports, I've worked with athletes, people that you've seen on television, even on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And let me tell you, you spend money to keep yourself out of the public eye if you can avoid it. And this recycling happens all the time. The Hyper Neo Geo 64 prototype I have that I am still dumping before you ask, it is just a pain because it's 96 ROM chips. This was purchased out of the SNK offices back in the day when they were going bankrupt and they had an office sale. So these things in this manner get out into the public all the time, and I have never once heard of a police raid trying to recover these things. If you know of one, leave me a comment down below because I would be curious. And I mean, at 7:30 in the morning, the police roll up to this guy's house, and apparently there was 10 different police officers there to raid him and say that he had stolen these things when he had the receipts for purchasing them off the sale. That is how absolutely stupid this story is. He had to give his DNA, his fingerprints, and photographs, and was basically accused of stealing these items from Sega of Europe when he had a receipt from the purchaser company that sold him the contents of the offices. That in and of itself just absolutely shows you that everything going on here behind the scenes between Sega and the police is just straight up, lack of a better term, corrupt from start to finish. And honestly, even with all of the information here, I still struggle to believe it. I mean, I genuinely do. I don't think it's anything other than the truth, but it's such a wacky story. Sega's basically throwing people in jail right now and raiding their houses because they accidentally gave away some Nintendo development kits. And that is a scary ass thing to think about. The fact that if you're in possession of something that somebody like Nintendo or Sega wouldn't want you to have, as opposed to trying to contact you and saying, hey, you weren't supposed to get this, we'd like to get it back, let's make a deal, keep it quiet, they're just gonna send the damn police to your house to kick the door in. But now that we've gotten through the pertinent facts of the actual story, we know what's going on here, and basically that the seller was questioning the police, and the police were realizing in real time that something weird was going on. I'll tell you what I think actually happened, and I feel like I'm pretty confident in being right in this one. The only thing that was seized as far as development kits were concerned were made by Nintendo. Now of course Nintendo sent these things to Sega to develop games for their hardware because Sega hasn't made any console since the Dreamcast. Nintendo was probably pretty pissed off that Sega had given away all of this confidential property in this office sale, and I'm sure Nintendo or somebody at Nintendo called Sega and said, how in the hell did you manage to do that? You need to get that shit back first, and you need to do it quickly. And Sega, deciding that the easiest thing to do was basically to kick someone's doors down with the British police, they said, you know what, we're just going to report it as stolen. And that's what it really does seem like here. Sega realized that they had made a massive mistake. Nintendo was ever-loving pissed off at them, and they decided to call the British police and say that there was a theft that had occurred. And at this point in time, the buyer of this hardware, who does legally own it because it was sold to him as far as the law would be concerned, still doesn't have anything back whatsoever, and was probably sent off to Sega or Nintendo and destroyed at this point in time. And obviously that raid ended up going nowhere because the buyer is talking about it to the news. It's not like they're sitting in a court or in some sort of jail cell somewhere, but the sad reality is that could have actually happened. Somebody who doesn't even know what they're buying, in all honesty, because they are just a reseller of hardware but not a video game specialist, ended up getting raided by the police. And again, it is all Nintendo hardware, so who do you think probably incited this entire incident? I'm guessing Sega probably wouldn't have cared that this has been sold off had it not all been Nintendo hardware. And that is just a straight up scary ass condition and world to live in, where prototype hardware sales could now end up with somebody reporting you for theft and having your house raided by the police, you hauled down into the precinct and made to give DNA and fingerprints. I mean, granted, in the US you wouldn't have to give DNA because 1, you'd have to get a court order, and 2, don't really think you need DNA when you're talking about consoles and not some other DNA crime. But it's just absolutely something that I didn't believe it when I first heard the rumor, because even I, knowing how far these companies can go, thought to myself, this just seems like an absolute unforced error that no company would ever commit. Sega would make a private deal in the background to make sure that the seller of these items got paid, made a little bit of money, they'd take them back, and just tell whoever sold everything, you're an absolute idiot, never do that again. Instead, today we have a story where somebody's house was raided by the police over development kits. We're not talking about the stuff that you would think police would raid houses over, all the bad things out in the world that the police should actually be spending their time investigating and removing from the streets. We're talking about software development kits and hardware for Nintendo consoles and handhelds that ended up in a private seller's hand. That is just absolutely straight up 10 out of 10 ridiculous, shocking, and honestly I can't believe it happened. So if you don't see Video Game Esoteric anytime soon, that's because the Sega, Nintendo, and SNK ninjas kicked my door down and took me to a black site somewhere. And trust me, in Chicago, we do have those black sites. They are very famous, and I'm sure they still exist. Leave me your comments down below. You tell me what you think, and I'll see you guys next time. And don't forget, Nintendo and Sega might be looking over your shoulder and coming for you next. Bye-bye.